Hello there, everyone. I'm Gaylen Morse, and welcome to Journey to Recovery. It's great having you along today. Our podcast today is Recognizing Relapse Points, Part 1. On today's program, we'll talk with Dr. Hal Baumchen about identifying situations and circumstances that lead to relapse, and then focus on specific ways to reduce relapse potential. Thanks for being with us today. Our podcast focuses on the co-occurring disorders of mental health and substance abuse. We present a wide range of thought-provoking, hopeful, and positive topics from a clinical yet practical perspective. And we provide a solid, truly integrated co-occurring disorder resource you can use in your treatment program or in your own recovery. Our host is Dr. Hal Baumchen, a licensed clinical psychologist and licensed alcohol and drug counselor. He's the executive director of Northland Counseling Services and the clinical director of North Star Regional Co-occurring Disorder Treatment Programs. He's an author, a speaker, and clinician with over 30 years of counseling experience. I'm here today with Tim Bode, operations director at Northland Counseling Services, and with Dr. Hal Baumchen, our host at Journey to Recovery. Hello, guys.
Morning, Gaylen.
Hey, Gaylen. Gaylen, it's a beautiful day outside here in Minnesota. It's wintertime here. It's about 35 degrees today, but we're going to have a snowstorm on Thursday. So we're going to get about 6 inches of snow.
And then I heard the highs after the snowstorm are going to be in the teens or
so it's
less.
going to get cold. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then it will really feel like we're in Minnesota.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Today is so pleasant, you kind of forget.
Right, exactly. So today, as Gaylen said, we're going to be talking about identifying situations and circumstances that might lead to relapse, and then talking about specific ways that we can reduce relapse potential. As we get going here, Dr. Hal, can you get us started with a definition of relapse?
Right. So what does it mean when we relapse? We talk about that in both substance abuse field and also in co-occurring disorders or mental health field as well. Relapse is defined as becoming ill again after a period of improvement in your health. It's a return to the former sickness or the illness becomes worse after having a period of improvement. Additionally, relapse can describe a return to a bad condition or a destructive form of behavior. So not just a return to a physical illness, but also some sort of bad habit that maybe you thought you had gotten rid of, and now here it is again, rearing its ugly head.
So obviously you can't have a relapse if you haven't had a length of recovery or sobriety.
Right. So many of the patients coming into the residential treatment center where I work, they have had some sobriety, and sometimes they've had it because they were in a treatment program, then they had to go to jail, now they're in our treatment program, but they count their recovery or their sobriety, that length of sobriety, as, 30, 40, 50 days. And they've had other ones in the past, but then here comes the return to symptoms again or a relapse.
How do mental health problems get mixed up into this? I'm sure they add to the relapse potential.
Right, they complicate each other, don't they, Gaylen? So we have that co-occurring disorder where we have substance abuse and mental health problems mixed together. That's what we talk about on this program. And so co-occurring problems become reoccurring trouble oftentimes. In co-occurring disorders treatment, we're concerned with preventing relapse for both substance abuse and mental health problems.
So relapse then can be a return of symptoms in either of those two categories.
Mental health symptoms may return or substance use may begin again. Because the substance use and the mental health issues are so intricately connected, a return of symptoms in one category may inflame or initiate the return of problems in the other category as well. Most people don't use the term relapse in the context of mental illness, like my depression is relapsing. We wouldn't really talk about it that way.
Yeah, they more likely talk about being well or doing well.
Or getting worse or being worse again.
Do you see this happening in programs that you are a part of?
I'm involved in 3 different programs, Gaylen. The mental health program that I'm involved in is called Bridges at Stone Creek, And that's just mental health. So people with anxiety, depression, ADHD, some anger problems, bipolar illness, and we can see symptoms returning sometimes, people getting worse. But interesting to me, it often leads to using or abusing drugs and alcohol. Sometimes the clients actually don't mention that they're having an increased amount of alcohol or substance use, and they're maybe embarrassed about it. But I think it is mixed in with that return or relapse potential.
Do you see it in the residential treatment program with co-occurring disorders?
Yes, I do. There's a return to drug or alcohol use, but it makes the mental health problems worse. So in the other program, it seems like the mental health problems made the substance use program or the substance use worse. And then in the residential treatment center for co-occurring disorders, they start using drugs and alcohol. The depression or anxiety or bipolar illness gets worse.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's probably helpful to have two different programs.
Right. We don't actually very often, start them in one and then put them in the other, although that does happen. But we have to have kind of a mindset where, hey, is your drug and alcohol making your mental health worse? Is your mental health worse? Is your mental health symptoms factoring into increased drug and alcohol use?
Mm-hmm.
Do you use the term lapse or relapse? Is every single use considered to be a relapse?
I've heard about programs that, if you used an aspirin, basically you're relapsing because you're using some kind of chemical. But I really don't see it that way. We're only talking about drug or alcohol use that's not prescribed. If you were given a medication by your doctor, we don't count that. And then if you just used one time and you thought like, boy, I didn't want to do that, that was a huge mistake, we call that a lapse. A relapse, in my opinion, is really where you start thinking again, like, I don't want to have sobriety, I want to go back to using. So, yep, that's a relapse.
Yeah, so lapse then is somebody who used or drank, but their goal is still to be abstinent, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. And then relapse would be a term used to mean return to frequent and heavy use.
This level of drug and alcohol use may be a slide toward the pre-treatment level of use. Mental health and substance use problems have increased to formal levels, and the goal of abstinence, at least for the moment, has been abandoned. Even if slips or lapses occur, relapse can be prevented. So we still want to recognize that and spend some energy, like what can we do to prevent relapse? Recognizing emerging signs or symptoms is the key to avoiding future problems.
Let's talk for a few minutes about high-risk situations.
One of the things that we're going through here are holidays in our calendar year, and sometimes that can be one of those high-risk situations that can occur, but we're going to talk about a number of them. In looking at relapse, it's important to recognize certain situations and circumstances that dramatically increase the potential or the likelihood of restarting your drug or alcohol abuse. Relapse prevention is based on increasing our understanding of what causes or triggers relapse and what can be done to reduce it. Experts in relapse prevention found that relapse is not only triggered by physical cravings, but it can be triggered by feelings of anxiety or stress or fear, anger, frustration, depression, all of those emotional things, those social pressures, interpersonal conflicts, all of those roll into producing a trigger to relapse.
There are three categories of risk factors that we're going to look at: intrapersonal, interpersonal, and situational. And the first of these three categories, interpersonal, refers to those factors that are inside of the client. So let's talk about some of those.
I was just going to ask you, hey, what do you think intrapersonal means? But we're trying to use those two words and not slur our word here a little bit. What do you think intrapersonal might include?
Things like mood or attitude.
Right. So sometimes I think like, hey, you're giving me a bad attitude here. But, be responsible. We're responsible for our own mood and attitude. That's coming out of me. That's intrapersonal. That's not between me and you.
Right.
You didn't produce my bad mood. I did.
Right. What about things like resistance levels, determination?
Right. Determination to stay sober, stay in your program, my own resistance to not to relapse, but my resistance to treatment or my resistance to being cooperative and going along with a program or something, that kind of resistance, that can increase potential for relapse. If I'm defiant, oppositional, and resistant, things aren't going to go well.
How about motivation? I know in my own case, if the motivation isn't there, the project becomes much more difficult.
And our motivation is hooked to those exceptions and excuses where I just don't feel like it, or I'm tired, or I'm lonely, or I'm frustrated, and all of those things drive motivation down. So you've heard me say this before in the program, Gaylen, that people, when they start a program, motivation is often very high. I'll do whatever it takes to get my life back, my wife back, my money back, my job back. And their motivation is high, but then it dumbs down to how little can I do and still get by.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure emotions have a lot to do with that, and urges and temptations, things like that.
Yeah, like we were talking about before, all of those emotions, anger, rage, frustration, irritability, depression, sadness, loneliness, those all factor into increased urges to use. Why? Because I want to prevent that ugly feeling. I want to numb it. I want to calm it down, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Physical illness and pain can be contributing factors.
You wouldn't think so, but boy, if somebody's in pain, their motivation goes down. They're looking for comfort, some way to dodge the discomfort and the pain that they're in. And they often reach for something that's handy. So they're again looking or tempted to look for drug or alcohol use.
And then another intrapersonal factor would be self-control.
Yeah, I like saying I'm a Bible reader. Some of you know that, but I looked in the Bible for wife control. I couldn't find that. I looked for pet control, boss control, employee control. Couldn't find any of that. The only control I could find was self-control. Don't you hate that? So that's one of those intrapersonal things where you need to control yourself. And if you don't, that can be an urge or a trigger. You're blaming everyone and everything for your bad attitude, your disposition, your lack of motivation. You're going to end up in trouble.
Let's talk about some interpersonal factors of relapse. And as you said, those are between people.
Right. Finally, I get to blame you for something.
So one of those is conflict with others.
Right. So fighting or arguing, feeling put down by others can all be cues or triggers to that emotion we were talking about. When I'm triggered with that emotion, because it came from an external source, I still want to use, or it's a trigger for relapse potential.
Mm-hmm. Another one is shame and embarrassment over your past behavior.
And what's interesting is it can be shame over I used yesterday. And I feel so bad about that. Like I blew 90 days of sobriety. A guy just told me he was 1 day short of 6 months and he started using heroin again. And he was now asking the doctor for Suboxone to help him with withdrawal effects. But he felt this shame and embarrassment that you're alluding to.
How about social and relational pressures, expectations of others, that sort of thing?
Especially around, well, anytime. I was going to say especially around holidays, but this can occur at any time where there's family pressure or friend pressure to use again. Come on, just let's have a drink. You know, what's one? It's not going to bother you at all. And I think the person with a substance use disorder has that going on in his head already, and then the part of him that wants, or her that wants to stay sober, stay in recovery, but part of him like, man, a cold beer would go a long ways here. Mm-hmm. And so there's social and relational pressure to use again.
Sometimes those expectations go beyond expectations and become demands. How about that?
Right, yeah, right. You wouldn't think so, but demands not just for substance use, but demands on your job or family expectations that you need to behave like this, be like this, and you start feeling that interpersonal pressure and fear that if you don't comply, you're going to get rejected or abandoned
Another factor is abusive and neglectful treatment.
by someone else.
Right.
And then you feel, again, some of these painful emotions, sadness, loneliness. You feel like damaged goods. You've been betrayed. Those are painful and hurtful, which can trigger the wish or the desire to make that go away, and it leads to relapse.
And related to that, then fear of abandonment or maltreatment.
Right. So now that's the culmination of all this rejection. Now I feel alone and abandoned. So all of these things that we're talking about, they increase my vulnerability to wanting to escape. So the interpersonal or intrapersonal stuff and the interpersonal stuff all lead me to think like, boy, I can't stand this anymore. And if you know that that's a potential for you, then maybe you can guard yourself against it. We're going to look at one more category.
Which is situational factors of relapse.
Things like financial pressure or job or occupational troubles.
All that stuff hanging over your head, Gaylen, it makes you feel like, boy, if I could escape this, I would. And the creditors are calling me and I'm going to have to file bankruptcy and I lost another job because of my use. Feel that shame and remorse and guilt again. All of those things just weigh on me so much, I want to use to escape.
And many times if you've used or abused, you have court and legal difficulties.
Right, that just hounds you. I talked to a guy the other day. He has 8 more years of probation just hanging over his head. You know, you guys know this, but you can't use when you're on probation. You can't do anything, and you're in deep trouble. And then a lot of times they do use, then what happens is a probation violation, which is many of the guys that I work with end up going to jail, not because they got arrested driving under the influence, but they violated their probation requirements. So those legal difficulties hang over your head. They create that situational problem you're talking about, Tim.
And then one more is housing problems.
Big deal, isn't it? When you leave treatment, we try to really be careful with where you're going to live next. Because if you don't have an address or you don't have a place where you get your mail and you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, you're homeless. And homelessness and housing problems are huge situational factors that often produce this angst we're talking about that I want to escape. And so how does using help homelessness? Well, it really doesn't, but you escape the pain of it. And sometimes I'm just bunking with a guy who's offering me drugs, or you're exchanging sexual favors for both drugs and a place to stay. So you can get into a lot of trouble with this situational stressor as well. To be successful in your recovery, it's absolutely essential to prevent the re-emergence of mental health and substance abuse symptoms. This can be accomplished by learning and practicing new skills and changing your thoughts and beliefs. Gaylen, before you take us out, I'd like to invite our listeners to join us next time where we talk about 12 specific areas that can be used in their own recovery to prevent relapse. So specific skills we're going to try to teach next time that are going to help you in your recovery.
Well, thanks everybody for listening to today's podcast. Today we were talking about recognizing relapse points and how to safeguard your recovery. Also, we invite you to check out resources on the web at journeytorecovery.com, where you can download other materials that help you identify triggers to use and develop skills to identify emotional problems, reduce symptoms, and prevent relapse at journeytorecovery.com. We've been visiting with author, speaker, and clinical psychologist Dr. Hal Baumchen. I'm Gaylen Morse. Thanks for listening to today's program. See you next time on Journey to Recovery. Remember, recovery is a journey. Enjoy the ride.